The county paperwork listed the property as agricultural, unimproved, assessed value $19,000, which meant, in the language lawyers use when they've already decided something doesn't matter, that nobody thought it was worth fighting over. It was a lighthouse keeper's cottage on 11 acres of granite coastline in Nova Scotia, a boathouse with a hole in its roof and a decommissioned lighthouse that hadn't held a working lamp in over a decade. It was also the only thing in the entire divorce that her husband's lawyer didn't bother contesting. So at 52, with $2,040 in her checking account, a Corolla with a check engine light that had been on for 8 months, and nowhere left in the world that felt like hers, Margot Fontaine drove 6 hours along the shore road to sell it and be done with the whole sorry business. She meant to be back in Halifax by Sunday. Instead, on her first night, she lit an old whale oil lamp in the keeper's window out of nothing but habit and cold hands, never knowing she'd just repeated something her father had done every single night for 26 years. And 4 days later, when she pried up a warped floorboard under the wood stove, what she found in the dark beneath it would make an entire coastline remember a man his own daughter never truly knew. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who tears up at a good ending, do us a favor and hit subscribe, because what's under Margot's floor is the kind of thing that stays with you long after this video's over. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. The lawyer's office in Dartmouth smelled like printer toner and the particular hush of a room where people learn what they're allowed to keep. Margot sat in a chair with wooden armrests, while a man named Doiron read the settlement terms in the flat, unbothered voice of someone reading out a grocery list to a person who isn't hungry. Wendell wasn't there. He'd sent his lawyer instead, a young man with an expensive haircut who checked his phone twice before the meeting even started properly. "Mr. O'Coin sends his regrets," the young man said, not quite meeting her eyes. "He's tied up today." "His regrets?" Margot repeated, and something in her voice made the young lawyer glance up before looking back down at his folder. He slid a pen across the table. "3 signatures and it's done," he said, as though he were doing her a kindness by keeping it brief. 23 years of marriage folded down into a stapled packet she could have mailed for the price of a stamp. He ran his finger down the asset schedule the way you'd point at items on a menu you weren't going to order from. The house on Cambridge Street, the pension, the good SUV. All staying with Mr. O'Coin under the terms. Then, almost as an afterthought, he tapped a line near the bottom. "This last item stays with you, real property, Shelburne County, a lighthouse station it looks like." He glanced up. "You'll want to sort out the back taxes on that eventually." "What's it worth?" Margot asked. The young lawyer almost smiled. "Honestly, the county's got the structures valued at next to nothing." Mr. O'Coin's position was that it wasn't worth the legal fees to contest. That was the kindest thing anyone said to her all day, though it hadn't been meant kindly at all. The lighthouse was hers, because nobody else could think of a single reason to want it. She picked up the cardboard box from beside her chair, the things Wendell had left out for her to collect from the kitchen island, like she was checking out of a hotel. A chipped enamel teapot that had belonged to her mother. A photograph of her father in his Canadian Coast Guard uniform, the brim of his cap throwing a shadow over half his face. A pocket watch that no longer kept time. 23 years, and it fit under one arm. The Corolla had a heater that took the first 15 minutes of any drive to decide whether it was going to work at all. Margot sat behind the wheel in the parking lot for a long time with her hands at 10 and 2 and nowhere in particular to go. No apartment. No job, not really. She'd left her position at the school board 11 years ago to follow Wendell's transfers from town to town, the way a person follows on weather. No friends who hadn't started out as his, in the way these things happen slowly and then all at once. What she had was a folded deed on the passenger seat, soft at the creases from decades in a county records drawer. The Fontaine parcel, Petit Passage Point, Shelburne County devised to Margot Ann Fontaine under the last will and testament of Theodore Fontaine, deceased. Her father had left her the point when he died 16 months ago. On a gray morning the previous spring, she'd flown out for the funeral, stayed one night at a motel off the highway, locked the cottage door, and told herself she'd deal with it later. Wendell had said the place wasn't worth the property tax. She hadn't argued. She rarely argued with Wendell. That had been the arrangement, though nobody had ever said it out loud. The drive took 6 hours and changed character 3 or 4 times. Highway gave way to secondary road, which gave way to a gravel lane the county graded twice a year if it remembered to. Spruce and tamarack pressed in close, on either side, the last rust of autumn burning through the deep green, and somewhere under all of it the smell of salt and cold stone that Margot's whole body remembered before her mind caught up. She'd spent childhood summers out here. Her mother would set her on the porch step in July, and her father would teach her the things he knew. How to read fog rolling in off the Atlantic before it reached the point. How to tell a fishing boat in trouble from one just running late. How to sit an 8-hour watch in a lamp room, and learn the particular sound a swell makes against granite when the tide's about to turn ugly. You're not just watching the water, Theo used to tell her, the two of them squinting out at the gray. You're watching for the moment somebody's still close enough to shore that a light can still reach them. Anybody can see a wreck after it happens. The trick is being there before. She'd been 9, and she'd thought he was only talking about boats. Wendell had found all of it charming when they were dating. A woman who knew Morse code from her father, who could read a barometer like other people read a newspaper. Later he found it embarrassing at dinner parties. He never told her outright to stop talking about her father, about the light, about the point. He just stopped asking. And a thing nobody asks about is a thing you slowly pack away until one day you realize you've folded the best part of yourself into a box in the back of a closet you can't quite remember the name of. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button now, because what Margot was about to find on that point reshapes everything you think this story is about. The gravel lane climbed a low headland and then dropped, and there it was, Petit Passage. The keeper's cottage sat low and square, white clapboard gone gray, a green tin roof spotted with rust, one shutter hanging by a single hinge. Behind it, closer to the cliff edge, the lighthouse itself rose in tiers of white and red. The lantern room's glass gone dull and salt-fogged, a rusted iron stair spiraling up the outside like something out of an old photograph nobody had colorized. Margot parked and sat with the engine ticking as it cooled. The cottage was smaller than she remembered and rougher than she wanted it to be. The porch sagged where a post had rotted clean through, and yet the walls stood square, and the roof, for all its rust, didn't show daylight through it anywhere she could see. When she finally got out and crossed the dead grass, the wind off the water smelled exactly like the last summer she remembered being happy. She'd come to sell a place she'd been a girl in. She hadn't expected the place to remember her back. The door stuck, then gave. Dust and cold ash and the particular smell of a room that's been holding its breath since the last person left it. One main room, a sleeping loft, a lean-to kitchen at the back. A cast-iron wood stove squatted on a hearth of flat beach stones. A plank table stood under the window with 2 mismatched chairs. Shelves her father had built lined the walls, holding the ordinary archaeology of a man living alone. A coffee tin of nails, a whale oil lamp with a soot-blackened chimney, a shelf of tide tables with broken spines, a coil of rope gone stiff with salt. On a hook by the door hung Theo's old Coast Guard coat, canvas faded to the color of driftwood. Margot pressed her face into it before she'd decided to, and it still smelled like him, pipe tobacco and cold rope and the clean nothing of open water. On the table sat his enamel mug, and beside it, a half-finished carving. A gull, wings roughed in, the tail still raw wood waiting on a knife that was never coming back. He'd been carving it the week he died. She looked around the room she'd inherited, and the practical part of her. The part 23 years of marriage had spent training, began doing arithmetic. Haul the stove, list the 11 acres with a broker who handled coastal teardowns. Take whatever a developer offered for a point too remote to build much on, and put the whole mountain of memory behind her the way she'd put everything else behind her. That was the plan when she walked through the door. It lasted about as long as the daylight did. Stay with us here, because the next thing Margot did, almost without deciding to, is the moment this whole story turns. She told herself it was the road, that nobody drove that gravel lane after dark. There was truth in it. But the truer thing was she didn't want to leave the smell of the coat, so she carried in her overnight bag, built a fire in the stove the way Theo had taught her, kindling teepeed over a curl of birch bark, and sat on the hearthstones while the iron ticked and warmed. The lamp on the shelf still had oil in it. She lit it and set it in the window, and its small flame doubled itself in the dark glass and threw a soft circle over the whole room. Night at Petit Passage was a thing she'd forgotten too. No glow on the horizon, just the sound of swell, working the rocks below the point, and a darkness that pressed against the windows like something with weight to it. She made coffee on the stove top, Because that's what you did when you didn't know what else to do. And she sat there with $2,040 and a Corolla and a box to her name. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, nobody in the world knew exactly where she was. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like setting down something she'd been carrying, so long she'd stopped noticing the weight. She woke before light to the sound of something moving in the yard. Footsteps on frost-stiff grass, the clink of metal, then the unmistakable sound of someone setting something down on the porch and stepping back. She came down the loft ladder as quietly as she could, took the iron poker off its hook out of an instinct she didn't examine, and put her eye to the gap where the shutter met the frame. A young woman stood at the edge of the yard where the grass met the spruce, watching the cottage, and she went very when she saw hoy smoke for 6 times each months. Bring CNT, maybe 20. Thin in the way of someone who'd grown fast and eaten little, a canvas duffel bag on her back, and an armload of split firewood she'd just stacked on the porch rail. I didn't know anybody was up here, she called out. Margot opened the door, poker forgotten at her side. Who are you? She said. I bring the wood, the girl said, as if that explained everything. She nodded at the stack. I keep the spring box clear too. She looked at the smoke rising, and something in her face went almost like grief. Nobody told me anybody was coming. Why are you bringing wood to an empty house? Margot asked. Because it's not supposed to fall down, the girl said. Theo told me to keep it from falling down. Her jaw worked. Nobody told me he'd want me to stop. Her name was June Potier, and it took her 3 days and a great deal of silence to give up even that much. That first morning she wouldn't come inside. She stood on the porch with her toque in her hands, answering questions in single syllables, her eyes moving constantly between the trees and the road and the boathouse, the way a creature moves when it's learned that the nearest exit is the most important thing in any room. So Margot made her coffee instead, which she also wouldn't take inside, and carried 2 cups out to the cold porch, and they sat on the step looking at the same gray water, not talking, which turned out to be the only way June Pothier knew how to be near a person. You knew my father, Margot said finally. He let me stay, June said, quieter. He didn't ask me anything. Just put a bowl of chowder in front of me and said the loft was mine as long as I wanted it. Where'd you come from? Margot asked. Around, June said. Group homes, mostly. 6 of them by the time I aged out. She said it flat, the way you'd read off a license plate. They hand you a garbage bag and a list of numbers that don't pick up. Then you're 18 and you're a grown-up and you figure it out. And you can't. There was a lamp in that window, June said, looking at the porch boards. In the rain, all the way up that lane. You could see it from the last bend. She shrugged, a small motion, so I walked toward it. Margot filed that away without comment, the way she was learning to do with this girl, because anything more would have sent her back into the trees. But it stayed with her. A lamp in a window, a door that opened. She'd lit that same lamp her first night without knowing she was repeating anything at all. If you're still with us, this is where the story stops being about a lighthouse and starts being about what was hidden inside it. Subscribe now, because the reason Théodore Fontaine kept that light burning is the reason none of this can ever be undone. She couldn't make herself list the place. That was the truth she arrived at over the following week, alone with a girl who appeared at the tree line each morning and vanished each dusk. Every time she got as far as photographing the cottage for a broker, she'd notice something. The careful way the shelves were joined. Hooks driven into the porch beam at 2 different heights, for 2 different sizes of pack. A second mattress rolled in the loft corner. 3 enamel mugs on the kitchen shelf, for a man who lived alone. So she stopped trying to sell it, and started doing the only thing she knew how to do when her life came apart. Fix something with her hands. She replaced the rotted post with a spruce pole. She and June cut and notched together. She cleaned the stovepipe of a season's creosote, lying on her back on the hearthstones with soot raining into her face. She reglazed a cracked pane with putty gone hard in a can under the sink, working it soft in her palms until it took. Wendell had spent years making her feel like a woman who consulted men before she did anything. Up here there was no one to consult. There was only the next board, the next nail, and the slow astonishment of discovering she was in fact entirely capable of doing the next thing herself. June worked beside her more each day, though never quite with her, always at a careful angle, the way a dog that's been kicked will sit near a fire but not within reach. Somewhere in the second week, without Margot asking, the girl started to talk. Not about herself, about Theo. He'd radio the weather to the whole strait at dawn. June said, working mud into a chink in the north wall, even when nobody was on shift to hear it. I asked him once why he bothered. He said a channel ought to have a human voice in it, in case somebody out there needed to hear one and hadn't said so yet. What else, Margot said, because she wanted the coins to keep coming. He taught me to read a swell before it broke, June said. How to tell fog that'll burn off by 10 from fog that means stay in tonight. He smoothed the mud flat with her thumb. He never once asked me what happened to me before. A whole year and he never asked. She was quiet a moment. You don't know how loud that is, she said, until somebody finally doesn't ask. Margot handed her the next trowel of mud and didn't ask either. That was the kindness, and the girl seemed to know it. The days took a shape. Margot woke in the cold loft before light, built the fire up from banked coals, made coffee, carried a cup to the porch to watch the turn from black to pewter to a hard, clean silver as the sun cleared the horizon. The spring box was 110 steps down a path June kept clear, and the first chore of every morning was carrying 2 pails back up it. By the 4th day, the carrying had stopped being a chore and become something closer to a prayer. The burn in her shoulders was the most honest thing she'd felt in years. One evening she fried potatoes in the last of the eggs in the cast-iron pan, and June came in and sat at the table without being asked, and ate, and didn't watch the door the whole time. "Can I ask you something?" Margot said. June's shoulders tightened slightly. "How long were you out there," she said, "before he found you? Before the loft?" June pushed a potato around her plate for a while. "A while," she said finally. "You learn things. Which church leaves the basement door open? Which Irving station won't run you off?" She looked up, and there was something almost like a smile. "Then there was a lamp up here that didn't run me off either." She went back to the plate. "I figured it was a trap. Honest. Nobody leaves a door open for nothing. Took me 3 nights to knock." "What changed your mind?" Margot asked. "Got cold enough," June said simply. Then, quieter. "And he never once made me say thank you. Most people, you take their help, they make you pay it back in being grateful. Theo just acted like I'd done him the favor by coming." She set down her fork. "I didn't know you were allowed to help somebody like that without keeping the receipt." Margot didn't answer right away. She got up, refilled June's coffee the way her father would have, and sat back down, and the two of them finished the meal in a quiet that for once had nothing guarded in it. On the 7th evening, clear and cold, June did something she'd never done. She came up onto the porch while Margot sat with coffee gone cold in her hands. "You ever been up the light?" June said. "Not since I was a girl," Margot said. "Theo said most people never climb the thing they own," June said. "He said the best part of the whole day is at the top." So they climbed the iron spiral stair in the dark, 100 and some steps, the whole tower humming faintly in the wind, until they came out into the little glass lantern room, where her father had spent the better part of 35 years. A stool bolted to the floor, a logbook stand, a brass fog signal switch worn smooth with handling, and tacked to the wall faded almost to nothing. A child's crayon drawing of a lighthouse and a boat, signed in the wobbling capitals of a 7-year-old, Margot. She had no memory of drawing it. He had kept it on that wall for over 30 years. She didn't trust her voice. Below them, the point fell away into black water, with one single point of yellow light burning in the cottage window where she'd left the lamp, the only made light for miles. He never lit it for himself, June said beside her, looking down. He lit it every night, whether he was up here or not. I asked him once why when nobody was coming. "What did he say?" Margot asked. June was quiet, getting it right. "He said you don't light it for the night somebody comes. You light it for all the nights they don't. So it's already lit on the one night they do." Neither of them spoke after that. They climbed down in the dark without talking, and for the first time June didn't roll her duffel bag into a pillow against the wall by the ladder, where she could watch the door. She used the mattress properly. It was a small thing. It was the largest thing Margot had seen in a year. It was on the 9th day, levering the wood stove 3 inches to true up the hearth, that she found it. Sweeping the bare floor underneath to reset the bricks, her broom caught on a seam, straight, clean, running square along the edge of one floorboard, too true to be an accident of age. She knelt and worked her pocket knife into the seam. The board came up with a dry, woody scrape, and beneath it was a cavity in the joists, dry and clean, the size of a steamer trunk. Cold air rose out of it with the smell of paper and old brass and something like a held breath. Inside were 3 leather-bound logbooks, soft-cornered from handling, a green metal cash box, and a biscuit tin, the big kind, its lid sealed with a strip of friction tape, far heavier than biscuits. Margot lifted the top logbook out with both hands. The leather was worn dark where thousands of thumbs had opened it, and when she turned back the cover, the first page was filled with her father's handwriting, small and square and slanting slightly uphill, dated October the 11th, 1978. She read the first entry by the gray window light, and then she sat down on the floor because her legs no longer wanted to hold her. If you've come this far with us, take a second and subscribe, because what's written in these logbooks is the thing that turns this whole coastline into something nobody there will ever forget. October the 11th, 1978. A man named Aldous Cummo walked off the wharf in Lockport tonight and just kept walking. Didn't plan to come this far. Fed him. He talked till 2 in the morning about something that happened out on a longliner in 71. Never told his wife. Sent him home in the morning with a full flask and a full tank. Told him the light stays lit if he ever needs it again. He won't, but it's there. She turned the page. The light stays lit. The next entry was 3 weeks on. A different name, a different reason. A fisherman's wife with 2 boys and a bruise she wouldn't explain. Given the loft for a night and gas money for a sister's place in Yarmouth by morning. Then a runaway girl of 16, 3 days out from a home in Bridgewater, fed and warmed and driven by Theo himself to the one RCMP officer on the coast he trusted to handle it gently. Page after page after page, names, dates, reasons. And at the end of nearly every entry, some form of the same line. The light stays lit. The door's not locked. Told them they could come back. She read them aloud after a while to the empty room, because it felt wrong to let words that quiet go unspoken a second time. June came in from the wood and stood in the doorway, listening, coat still on. When Margot reached one entry with no name, only initials, and the words, "Thank you for not asking me anything," June turned and went back out onto the porch, and Margot let her go and didn't follow. She understood now what the cottage had been trying to tell her all week. The hooks at 2 heights, the second mattress, the 3 mugs for a man who lived alone, the lamp she'd lit her first night without knowing why. For 26 years, her father had kept a light burning on the coldest coast in the province, so that anyone walking off the worst night of their life would have somewhere to walk toward. He'd fed them and warmed them, and listened to what they couldn't say to anyone else, and he'd written each one down not as a debt, but as a life. He'd never said a word about it. Not to the county, not to the paper, not to his own daughter, who'd spent her childhood summers 15 feet from a trapdoor she never knew existed. She opened the cash box. Inside was $260 in soft small bills, a brass key that fit nothing she knew of, and a hardware receipt from 1982 for 2 cots and a propane heater her father had kept, for reasons she'd never know for 40 years. Then she peeled the tape off the biscuit tin. It was full of letters, 58 of them, in 58 different hands, on lined paper, church bulletins, the back of a bait order form, one on the torn cardboard of a cereal box. All addressed in one way or another to the man on the point. A woman named Colette who wrote she'd driven out to Petit Passage in 1996, meaning not to drive back, and that the lamp in the window was the only reason she had grandchildren now. A man named Doiron, no relation to the lawyer, just the coast being small, who wrote that Theo's $40 and a tank of gas got his family through them the plant in Shelburne closed, and that he'd paid it forward a dozen times since and meant to keep going. A boy's careful young hand that only said, "Thank you for not asking me anything," signed with the same initials as the entry in the log. Letter after letter, a quiet archive of a coastline's worst nights, and the one door that had stayed open through all of them. June came back in when the light was failing. Margot had lit the lamp without thinking and set it in the window, and the 2 of them sat at the plank table with the logbooks open between them. "He wrote me down, didn't he?" June said. It wasn't really a question. Margot found the page, turned the book so June could see, but didn't read it aloud, because some things a person ought to read in their own time. June looked at it a long while. "I keep it where I can find it," she said finally, which made no sense and perfect sense at once, and Margot understood the girl had read her own entry before, alone, more than once, the way you'd go back to the one piece of evidence you'd ever mattered. And then, 2 pages from the end of the last logbook, Margot found her own name. Margot called tonight. The entry read, dated a little over a year before he died. Sounded thin. That husband of hers does all the talking even when he's not in the room. You can hear him in the spaces where she used to put herself. She says everything's fine in the voice she's used since she was small, the one she uses when things aren't. I never could push her. She's got her mother's spine, goes quiet and sets like concrete. I wish she'd come out to the point. I wish she'd sit up in the light with me one more time and watch the water and remember she was somebody before she was somebody's wife. But she won't. Maybe not ever. The light's lit for everybody else's child. I keep it lit for mine too, just in case. The door's not locked, Margot. It never was. He'd written her name into a book of strangers and kept a light on for 26 years she never knew about. Margot closed the book and pressed it flat against her chest, the way you'd hold a child, and the well she'd thought had run dry months ago turned out to have only been waiting for the right reason. She cried there on the floor in the lamplight, not for the marriage she'd lost, but for the man who'd kept a door unlocked his whole life and died before his own daughter ever walked through it. She wasn't going to sell this place. She'd known it for days. Now she knew why. She came down the lane 2 days later for supplies, and that was how the county found out Theodore Fontaine's girl had come home. The village at the bottom of the road was called Ingomar Cove, one main street with a diner, a hardware store, and a wharf. The woman behind the diner counter, broad and gray and quick, looked at Margot over the till for a long 3 seconds. "You're Theo's," she said, and it carried the length of the room. "You've got his eyes." What happened next was something Margot had no room for, because in 23 years with Wendell she had learned to be a woman people were polite to. These people were not polite. They were something older than polite. A gray-haired man took her hand in both of his. "Come on," he said. "Your daddy fed me and put me straight the night. I nearly did something I couldn't take back. I've paid it forward 11 times since. I keep count." A nurse named Colette sat across from her and couldn't say much at all, because some debts are too large for the mouth. An RCMP officer named Beliveau, slow and soft-spoken, leaned on the end of the booth with his hat in his hands. More than one night, dispatch would get a call from the point, he said. Your father's voice, steady as anything. "Got somebody up here, needs a ride and a friendly face, Remy. Come slow and come alone." When Theo Fontaine asked you to come slow and come alone, you understood a life was being handed across. I drove that lane in every weather there is. Never once regretted it. If you've come this far with Margot, take a second and subscribe, and tell us in the comments, because the next person to come up that lane wasn't looking to be saved. He was looking to take the coast. It went on like that the better part of an hour, a whole village quietly returning the 26 years Theo had spent on it. The man who ran the hardware store refused her money for stovepipe and lamp wicks both. "Your daddy carried a tab for me in '81 that I paid back in '93, he said, and never once mentioned it in between. So you'll take the wicks and let an old man feel like he's settled up." By the time she drove back with 2 weeks of supplies and a propane heater, Margot understood she hadn't inherited 11 acres and a teardown. She'd inherited a lamp and a list of everyone it had ever been lit for and a job. The black pickup came up the lane 11 days later, the smooth, deep note of an engine that cost more than the cottage and the Corolla combined. A man got out who did not belong at Petit Passage and knew it and didn't care. 50-something, trim in a quilted vest, boots that had never once seen mud, the unhurried smile of a man who's already decided how the conversation ends. "Desmond Wickware," he said. "Maritime Horizon Resorts. You'd be the daughter Margot Fontaine," she said, and didn't take the hand. "This is my property. What can I do for you?" He let the hand fall without any sign it bothered him and turned a slow circle, taking in the point, the cliff, the light. "I made your father an offer on this parcel 3 times over 8 years, Wickware said. "Generous, frankly, given what the county's got it assessed at. He turned me down 3 times and never once gave me a reason a businessman could understand." His smile went small. "I was sorry to hear he passed. I'm here because I'd hate for his stubbornness to cost you what it cost him." Margot said nothing, which was a thing she was learning from Theo and from the water, that silence is a tool, and most men can't stand to leave it lying on the table. Wickware couldn't. "Let me be plain," he said. "This point is the last unbuilt headland on this stretch of coast with a clear view like that, and I've got 60 acres under contract all around you. I've got a lodge designed, 42 rooms, a restaurant. Every rendering sits right where we're standing. Your 11 acres are the keystone. Without the point, there's no view, and without the view, there's no resort." He named a number, $12,000. He watched her face the way a man watches a card table. When that didn't move her, he named another, $60,000 for a tax-rolled teardown and 11 acres of granite. You could start over anywhere. "I'm told you're between things." Between things. That was Wendell's phrase, the gentle little knife of it, making her smallness sound like concern, which meant Wickware had talked to somebody Wendell knew, or Wendell himself. Margot felt the old reflex rise. 23 years of softening, agreeing, making the man comfortable so the moment would end. And then she felt the lamp behind her in the window, and the 58 letters in the tin, and her father's hand writing the door's not locked, Margot, it never was. The reflex died where it stood. The parcel's not for sale, Margot said. Wasn't for sale when he was alive. Isn't now. You can keep your renderings. Stay right here because this is where Desmond Wickware stopped smiling and made the mistake that cost him the whole coast. Subscribe now because the thing Théodore Fontaine did 17 years before he died is about to reach out of the past and protect the one thing he ever asked the world to leave alone. Wickware studied her with a new flatness in his eyes. That's a shame, he said, the warmth gone out of his voice like heat out of a cold stovepipe, because here's the part your father never had to deal with. That cottage is a documented fire hazard. No permits, no inspection, a wood stove decades out of code. And my surveyor tells me there's a question about the right-of-way that gives you access at all. He set a card on the porch rail since she wouldn't take it from his hand. My lawyers can spend 2 years and more money than you'll ever see, turning this place into a problem you can't afford to keep. Or you take $60,000 and a clean walk. People in your situation usually come around once they do the arithmetic. He got back in the truck. People always do the arithmetic, he said through the window and backed off the point and was gone. June had come up beside her at some point, silent as weather. That's the resort man, she said quietly. He sent a surveyor out here twice while Theo was alive. Theo ran him off both times. She looked sideways at Margot. You going to be all right? I don't have a lawyer, Margot said. I don't have $60,000, and I don't have 2 years, and I don't have anybody. She picked the card up off the rail, so I honestly don't know. She didn't sleep much that night. She lit the lamp before she climbed the ladder anyway, and set it in the window where it belonged, and decided that whatever else happened, the light was staying on. The answer came up the lane the next afternoon, the way the answer had always come up that lane, in the shape of someone Theo had once saved. A faded blue sedan pulled in and parked at a respectful distance, and a woman got out, late 60s, tall and straight-backed in a wool coat, a worn leather case in one hand. She looked at the cottage and the light the way you look at a place you've heard about your whole life. Then came to the porch steps and stopped. You'd be Margot, she said. I'm Adele Boudreau. I practiced law in Shelburne before I had the good sense to quit. She looked up at the chimney smoke. I came because Rémi Béliveau told me Theo Fontaine's daughter was out at the point, and because a man in a black truck's been asking questions at the registry office about your right-of-way, and the two of those together got me out of a warm chair I'd planned to die in. May I sit down? They sat at the plank table. Adele took off her glasses, folded them in both hands. My son, she said, my only one. He was 19 and in a bad way I won't put words to. And he came out here in the dark because a janitor at the hospital, of all people, told him there was an old man at Petit Passage who'd sit with you and not call anybody you didn't want called. She turned the glasses over. Theo kept him 3 days, fed him, walked the shore with him, didn't lecture him, didn't tell me, just kept the light on until my boy could keep himself breathing without help. He's 43 now. 2 kids. An engineer in Moncton. She put the glasses back on, her voice coming back to level. So when I tell you I'm going to handle the man in the black truck, Miss Fontaine, I'd like you to understand I've been waiting 24 years for the chance. You'd be doing me a kindness to let me. Margot showed her everything. The logbooks, the cash box, the tin of 58 letters. Adele went very quiet, read 3 of the letters and had to stop. Then she got businesslike, because business was how Adele Boudreau held herself together. The fire hazard, she said, is a bluff. A man can't condemn your home because he wants the view from it. We'll have a certified inspector on record within the week. The right-of-way's older than he is and recorded plain. That's a bluff too. Bluffs only work on people who can't afford to call them. Let's make sure you can. But here's what I want to know, Adele went on, her voice changing. Did your father ever do anything with the development rights on this land? Sign anything? Speak to anyone about a conservancy? Margot started to say no, and then stopped, because the brass key in the cash box had been bothering her since the first day. She remembered, all at once, a summer afternoon in her teens, sitting in the lantern room, while a woman in a green vest with a clipboard climbed the stair. Her father shaking the woman's hand, the woman saying something about a thing being recorded, and her father in a voice she'd filed away and forgotten for decades. Then that's settled, and nobody can ever change it. Not after I'm gone. Green vest, Adele said when Margot told her. That'd be the Southern Shore Land Trust. Recorded, she stood up. Get your coat. We're going to the registry office. It took 2 days and a clerk who'd known Theo and treated the request like a personal mission, but they found it. Deed book page 94. Recorded the 4th of May, 17 years before Theo died. A conservation easement. Theodore Fontaine, with no fanfare and no mention to a living soul, had granted the development rights on all 11 acres of Petit Passage to the Southern Shoreland Trust, in perpetuity. The land could never be subdivided, never host commercial lodging. It could hold the cottage and the light, and nothing larger forever, a restriction that ran with the land no matter who owned it, no matter how many black trucks came up the lane. He had given away, for nothing, 17 years before he died, the exact thing Desmond Wickware had driven out to buy. But he's a developer, Margot said. Wouldn't his lawyers have found this? Why offer me a dime for land he can't build on? Oh, he found it, Adele said, and it was not a warm smile. A title search would have turned this up in an afternoon. He's known about this easement longer than you have. She folded her hands, which tells me exactly what he was really doing on your porch. He wasn't betting you'd sell him buildable land, child. He was betting you didn't know what you had. That you were broke and grieving and divorced and would take $60,000 to make him go away. Then he'd go to that little land trust 2 rooms above a fishing co-op, always short on money, and offer them a trade. A bigger parcel somewhere else, a check they couldn't refuse, to get the restriction lifted, quiet. Cash-poor trusts have done worse. You know exactly what you have now, Adele said, and that trust will never let this easement go. You want to know who runs the Southern Shore Land Trust these days? A woman named Colette Aucoin took the volunteer director's seat 9 years back. Drove out to Petit Passage in 1996, meaning not to drive back. You've got her letter in that biscuit tin. The brass key, it turned out, fit a small lockbox at the trust's office in Barrington, where the original signed grant had been kept all this time, with a note in Theo's hand clipped to it. For Margot, when the time comes, she'll understand. Adele drove her the hour to Barrington herself, because a thing like this shouldn't be opened alone in an empty room. The woman who came out to meet them was the nurse from the diner, the one who hadn't been able to find words. Colette Aucoin put a hand to her mouth when she saw what Margot was holding. I knew he'd put a restriction on it, she said. I didn't know he'd left a key for you. That developer's people called us twice this spring, offered the trust a bigger tract near Kejimkujik to release the rights on the point. Better public benefit, they said. She shook her head. I let them finish the pitch both times. Then I told them the man who placed this easement pulled my car out of a snowbank at 2 in the morning and never told a soul. And there's no acreage on God's earth that buys back what this point is. They didn't understand that. People like that never do. They think everything has a price because everything they've got, they bought. Under the folded grant, Margot found a second envelope she hadn't expected. Thin, soft at the corners, her name on the front in the uphill hand. She didn't open it there. She read it that night in the loft by the lamp, alone, and what was in it she never told anyone, not even June. Except that afterward she folded it back along its worn creases and tucked it into the front of a new logbook she'd already decided to start. Desmond Wickware came back up the lane 8 days later, and this time he didn't get out of the truck. Adele walked down to meet him in her wool coat, with an envelope in her hand. Margot watched from the porch as the old lawyer passed her envelope through the window and said something brief and unpleasant. Margot couldn't hear. She didn't need to. She watched the back of his neck go red. Watched him shove the recorded easement back through the window. The window went up. The black truck backed off the point for the last time, careful now on the gravel, and Margot never saw it again. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need a courtroom, Adele said, climbing the porch steps. Your father built it 17 years ago and never told a soul. She looked around at the light and the water. He didn't do it to beat anybody. He did it so this would stay a place a person could walk to when they had nowhere else, long after he was gone. If you've made it all the way here, you're exactly the kind of person these stories are for. Subscribe and stay for the last few minutes, because what Margot did next is the whole point of everything that came before. The village found out the way a village finds out everything, slowly, and then all at once. By spring, the story of the lamp at Petit Passage had traveled the length of the shore and a few counties past it. People started coming up the lane, not in trouble this time, but to leave things. A fisherman left a cord of split spruce by the porch without a word. Doran left an envelope of small bills in the cash box, the 13th time paid forward, with a note that said only, for the next one. Remy Beliveau came out on his day off and helped June rehang the porch gutter, then stayed for coffee and told a story about Theo that made all three of them laugh until the cottage rang with it, a sound Margot thought those walls hadn't heard enough of. "You're good at this," Margot told June one evening, watching her show a boy from the village how to split a round clean along the grain. "At what?" June said. "Teaching. I'm just showing him where the wood wants to break," June said, and looked uncomfortable, and Margot let it go, because she'd learned you let people arrive at the truth of themselves in their own time, and when they do, you pour them another coffee. She took a part-time job at the hardware store in Ingomar Cove to keep the propane filled and the lights on. She learned to run the fog signal and the weather radio, and on clear mornings she'd key it at dawn and read the forecast to the whole straight in a slow, steady voice, even when nobody was on shift to hear it, because a channel ought to have a human sound in it, in case somebody out there needed one. Every night before the dishes or the radio or the loft, she filled the lamp, trimmed the wick, and set it in the window where it had sat for 26 years, so that anyone walking up the worst road in the county, on the worst night of their life would have, the way Colette had, the way June had, the way her own father had quietly hoped she someday would. Somewhere to walk toward. She started a fourth logbook. She didn't tell anyone. She just took a new leather book off the shelf at the hardware store, the closest match to the old ones, tucked her father's last letter inside the front cover, and waited. She didn't wait long. It was a night in early May, cold rain coming sideways off the water, when headlights she didn't recognize crawled up the last bend and stopped in the yard. A woman climbed out, 30 maybe, soaked through a thin jacket, lifting a sleeping child off the back seat and holding him against her shoulder. She looked at the cottage, at the smoke, at the single yellow lamp in the window, then at Margot in the doorway, and she wore the expression Margot had seen on other faces, and once, for 23 years, in her own mirror. Someone carrying more than she could say. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I saw the light. I didn't think anybody." "You can't go," Margot said. "It's coming down too hard and that boy's asleep." She stepped back and held the door. "Come in out of it. There's a fire, and there's chowder on the stove. The loft's made up." The woman didn't move for a second. "Why?" she said. The same question Margot had asked the hardware man about the lamp wicks. The same question she suspected 58 people had asked over 26 years. Margot smiled. "My father used to get asked that a lot," she said. "Come inside." She fed them and warmed them and made up the loft and didn't ask the woman a single question she didn't want to answer. In the morning, after the rain had blown through and the woman had gone on toward a sister's place in Moncton with a full tank and $40 folded into her coat pocket, Margot sat at the plank table and opened the new logbook and wrote, in a hand that slanted just slightly uphill the way her father's had, a date, a name, and a reason, and at the end of it, the only line that mattered, "The light stays lit. The door's not locked," told her she could come back. June read it over her shoulder, which she'd never have done a season ago, and was quiet a while. "He'd have liked that you kept it the same," she said. "He'd have liked that you stayed," Margot said. June went a little still the way she did, then nodded and went out to split wood that didn't split itself. And Margot watched her from the window, a thin girl in a coat that finally fit, working in the yard of a point that could never be sold, under a light her father, by choice, had kept burning for 100 nights nobody came, and one night, every single time, somebody finally did. Maybe that's the part most of us miss. We spend our lives measuring the wrong things, the house, the pension, the good SUV, the view from the point, and we call that worth, and we let the people who measure that way tell us what we're worth too. But the things that actually hold a place together never show up on an assessor's card. A man fed strangers in the dark for 26 years and wrote each one down not as a debt, but as a life. He never asked to be thanked. He never told a soul, and in the end, the quiet kindness he gave away for free was the one thing on that whole coast no amount of money could ever buy, because he'd made it mean too much to too many people for money to move it. Desmond Wickware had $60,000 and a folder full of renderings, and he lost to a man who'd been dead for over a year, because he never once understood that the most valuable thing a person can own is the good they've quietly done for someone who couldn't pay it back. That was Théodore Fontaine's real inheritance, not the 11 acres, not the cottage the county valued at next to nothing. He left his daughter a lamp and the long quiet record of every soul it had ever guided home, and the simplest instruction a person can be handed: keep the light burning, and don't say much about it. So if there's a light you've been meaning to leave on for somebody, Some small kindness you keep telling yourself doesn't matter because no one's there to see it. Leave it on anyway. Leave it on for all the nights nobody comes, because you'll almost never know which night was the one that mattered. And to the person walking up the dark road toward it, it will matter more than you could ever measure. Margot was 52 years old. She had a Corolla with a dead check engine light, a part-time job at a hardware store, a girl in the loft who finally slept through the night, and a point of granite that could never be taken. She had a tin of 58 letters and counting, a new logbook with one entry in it, and a lamp in the window throwing its small light out into a dark that had never frightened her less. Every so often, on a clear evening with the wind gone quiet, for once she'd climb the iron stair of the old light and sit in the little glass room where her father had sat for 35 years, watching the water the way he'd taught her when she was 9, and thought he was only talking about boats. She'd watch the light go gold, then rose, then gone. And down below in the cottage window, the lamp she'd lit would come up bright as the dark came on. A single steady point of yellow on the whole black face of the coast, small and certain and burning for whoever needed it next. The road came up to her door, and the door was not locked. It never had been. And Margot Fontaine, who had arrived with a cardboard box and a plan to be gone by Sunday, sat in her father's light above her father's flame and understood, finally, that she was not at the end of anything. She was only just getting started.